Hey guys, this is Cassidy. I hope you're all doing well. Today I'm back to read part 3 of The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. And where we left off last time was chapter 16. Nash had long legs, so a lazy amble on his part required me to jog to keep up. I looked in each room as we passed, but they were all a blur of art and architecture and natural light. At the end of a long hall, Nash threw open a door. I prepared myself to see evidence of a brawl. Instead, I saw Grayson and Jameson standing on opposite sides of a library that took my breath away. The room was circular. Shelves stretched up 15 or 20 feet overhead, and every single one was lined completely with hardcover books. The shelves were made of a deep, rich wood. Spread across the room, 4 wrought iron staircases spiraled towards the upper shelves, like the points on a compass. In the library center, there was a massive tree stump, easily 10 feet across. Even from a distance, I could see rings marking the tree's age. It took me a moment to realize that it was meant to be used as a desk. I could stay here forever, I thought. I could stay in this room forever and never leave. So, Nash said beside me, casually eyeing his brothers. Whose ass do I need to kick first? Grayson looked up from the book he was holding. Must we always resort to fistfights? Looks like I have to volunteer for the first ass-kicking, Nash said. Oh, it looks like I have a volunteer for the first ass-kicking, Nash said, then shot a measuring look at Jameson, who was leaning against one of the wrought iron staircases. Do I have a second? Jason smirked. Oh, do I have a second? Jason smirked. Couldn't stay away, could you, big brother? And leave Avery here with you, knuckleheads? Until Nash mentioned my name, neither of the other two seemed to have registered my presence behind him, but I felt my invisibility slip away, just like that. I wouldn't worry too much about Miss Grams, Grayson said, silver eyes sharp. She's clearly capable of taking care of herself. Translation: I'm a soulless, gold-digging con artist, and he sees straight through me. Don't pay any attention to Gray, Jameson told me lazily. None of us do. Jamie, Nash said. Zip it. Jameson ignored him. Grayson is in training for the insufferable Olympics, and we really think he can go all the way if he can just jam that stick a little farther up his asterisk, I thought, channeling Max. Enough, Nash grunted. What did I miss? Xander bounded through the doorway. He was wearing a private school uniform, complete with a blazer that he shed in one liquid motion. You haven't missed anything at all, Grayson told him, and Miss Grams was just leaving. He flicked his gaze toward me. I'm sure you want to get settled. I was the billionaire now, and he was still giving me orders. Wait a second. Xander frowned suddenly, taking in the state of the room. Were you guys brawling in here without me? I still saw no visible signs of a fight or destruction, but obviously Xander had picked up on something I hadn't. This is what I get for being the one who doesn't skip school, he said mournfully. At the mention of school, Nash looked from Xander to Jameson. No uniform, he noted. Playing hooky, Jamie? Two ass-kickings it is. Xander heard the phrase ass-kicking, grinned, bounced to the balls of his feet, and pounced with no warning, tackling Nash to the ground. Just some friendly, impromptu wrestling between brothers. Pinned you, Xander declared triumphantly. Nash hooked his ankle around Xander's leg and flipped him, pinning him to the ground. Not today, little brother, Nash grinned, then flashed a much darker look at the other two brothers. Not today. They were, the four of them, a unit. They were Hawthornes. I wasn't. I felt that now in a physical way. They shared a bond that was impervious to outsiders. I should go, I said. I didn't belong here, and if I stayed, all I would do was stare. You shouldn't be here at all, Grayson replied tersely. Stuff a sock in it, Gray, Nash said. What's done is done, and you know as well as I do that if the old man did it, there's no undoing it. Nash wiggled his head toward Jameson. And as for you, self-destructive tendencies aren't nearly as adorable as you think they are. Avery solved the keys, Jameson said casually, faster than any of us. For the first time since I'd walked into the room, all four brothers fell into an extended silence. What is going on here? I wondered. The moment felt tense, electric, borderline unbearable, and then, You gave her the keys? Grayson broke the silence. I was still holding the key ring in my hand. It felt suddenly very heavy. Jameson wasn't supposed to give me these. We were legally obligated to hand over a key, Grayson interrupted Jameson and started walking slowly toward him, snapping the book in his hands closed. We are legally obligated to give her a key, Jameson, not the keys. I'd assumed that I was being messed with. At best, I thought it was a test, but from the way they were talking, it seemed more like tradition, an invitation, a rite of passage. I was curious how she'd do, Jameson arched an eyebrow. Do you want to hear her time? No, Nash boomed. I wasn't sure if he was answering Jameson's question or telling Grayson to stop advancing on their brother. Can I get up now? Xander interjected, still pinned beneath Nash and seemingly in a better humor than the other three combined. Nope, Nash replied. I told you she was special, Jameson murmured as Grayson continued closing in on him. And I told you to stay away from her. Grayson stopped just out of Jameson's reach. So I see that you two are talking again, Xander commented jollily. Excellent. Not excellent, I thought, unable to draw my eyes away from the storm brewing just feet away. Jameson was taller, Grayson broader through the shoulders. The smirk on the former's face was matched by steel on the latter's. Welcome to Hawthorne House, mystery girl. Jameson's welcome seemed to be more for Grayson's benefit than for mine. Whatever this fight was about, it wasn't just a difference of opinion on recent events. It wasn't just about me. Stop calling me mystery girl. I'd barely spoken since the moment the library door had swung inward, but I was getting sick of playing spectator. My name is Avery. I'd also be willing to call you Eris, Jameson offered. He stepped forward into a beam of light shining down from a skylight above. He was toe-to-toe with Grayson now. What do you think, Gray? Got a nickname preference for our new landlord? Landlord. Jameson was rubbing it in, like he could handle being disinherited if it meant that the heir apparent had lost everything too. I'm trying to protect you, Grayson said slowly. I think we both know, Jameson replied, that the only person you've ever protected is yourself. Grayson went completely, deathly still. Xander, Nash stood, pulling the youngest brother to his feet. Why don't you show Avery to her wing? That was either Nash's attempt to prevent a line from being crossed, or an indication that one had already been. Come on, Xander bumped his shoulder lightly against mine. We'll stop for cookies on the way. If that statement was meant to dissipate the tension in the room, it didn't work, but it did draw Grayson's attention away from Jameson, for the moment. No cookies. Grayson's voice was strangled, like his throat was closing down around the words, like Jameson's last shot had cut off his air completely. Fine, Xander replied cheerily. You drive a hard bargain, Grayson Hawthorne. No cookies. Xander winked at me. We'll stop for scones. Chapter 17. The first scone is what I like to call the practice scone. Xander stuffed an entire scone in his mouth, handed one to me, then swallowed and continued lecturing. It's not until the third or fourth scone that you develop any kind of scone-eating expertise. Scone-eating expertise? I repeated in a deadpan. Your nature is skeptical, Xander noted. That will serve you well in these halls, but if there is one universal truth in the human experience, it is that a finely owned scone-eating palate does not just develop overnight. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of Orion and wondered how long he'd been tailing us. Why are we standing here talking about scones? I asked Xander. Orion had insisted that the Hawthorne brothers weren't a physical threat, but still, at the very least, Xander should have been trying to make my life miserable. Are you supposed to hate me? I asked. I do hate you, Xander replied, happily devouring his third scone. If you notice, I've kept the blueberry confections for myself and handed you, he shuddered, the lemon-flavored scones. Such is the depth of my loathing for you personally and on principle. This isn't a joke. I felt like I'd fallen into Wonderland, and then fallen again, rabbit hole after rabbit hole, in a vicious cycle. Traps upon traps, I could hear Jameson saying, and riddles upon riddles. Why would I hate you, Avery? Xander asked finally. There were layers of emotion in his tone that hadn't been there before. You aren't the one who did this. Tobias Hawthorne had. Maybe you're blameless, Xander shrugged. Maybe you're the evil genius that Gray seems to think you are, but at the end of the day, even if you thought that you'd manipulated our grandfather into this, I guarantee that he'd be the one manipulating you. I thought of the letter that Tobias Hawthorne had left me. 2 words, no explanation. Your grandfather was a piece of work, I told Xander. He picked up a 4th scone. I agree. In his honor, I eat this scone. He did just that. Want me to show you to your rooms now? There's got to be a catch here. Xander Hawthorne had to be more than he appeared. Just point me in the right direction, I told him. About that, the youngest Hawthorne brother made a face. There's a chance the Hawthorne house is just a tiny bit hard to navigate. Imagine, if you will, that a labyrinth had a baby with Where's Waldo, only Waldo is your rooms. I attempted to translate that ridiculous sentence. Hawthorne House has an unconventional layout. Xander did away with the 5th and final scone. Has anyone ever told you you have a way with words? Hawthorne House is the largest privately owned residential home in the state of Texas. Xander led me up a staircase. I could give you a number for square footage, but it would only be an estimate. The thing that truly separates Hawthorne House from other obscenely large, castle-like structures isn't so much its size as is its nature. My grandfather added at least one new room or wing every year. Imagine, if you will, that a M.C. Escher painting conceived a child with Leonardo da Vinci's most masterful designs. Stop, I ordered. New rule. You're no longer allowed to use any terminology for baby-making when describing this house or its occupants, including yourself. Xander brought a hand melodramatically to his chest. Harsh. I shrugged. My house, my rules. He gawked at me. I couldn't believe I'd said it either. But there was something about Xander Hawthorne that made me feel like I didn't have to apologize for my own existence. Too soon? I asked. I'm a Hawthorne. Xander gave me his most dignified look. It's never too soon to start trash-talking. He resumed playing the tour guide. Now, as I was saying, the east wing is actually the northeast wing, located on the second floor. If you get lost, you just look for the old man. Xander nodded toward a portrait on the wall. This was his wing, these last few months. I'd seen pictures of Tobias Hawthorne online, but once I looked at the portrait, I couldn't look away. He had silvery gray hair and a face more weather-worn than I'd realized. His eyes were Grayson's, almost exactly. His build Jameson's, his chin Nash's. If I hadn't seen Xander in motion, I might not have recognized a resemblance between him and the old man at all. But it was there in the way Tobias Hawthorne's features pulled together. Not the eyes or nose or mouth, but something about the shape in between. I'd never even met him. I tore my eyes from the portrait and looked at Xander. I'd remember if I had. Are you sure? Xander asked me. I found myself looking back at the portrait. Had I ever met the billionaire? Had our paths crossed even for a moment? My mind was blank, except for one phrase, looping over and over and over again. I'm sorry. Chapter 18. Xander left me to explore my wing. My wing. I felt ridiculous even thinking the words. In my mansion. The first 4 doors led to suites, each of them sized to make a king bed look tiny. The closets could have doubled as bedrooms. And the bathrooms. Showers with built-in seats and a minimum of 3 different shower heads apiece. Gargantuan bathtubs that came with control panels. Television inlaid with every mirror. Dazed, I made my way to the 5th and final door on my hall. Not a bedroom, I realized when I opened it. An office. Enormous leather chairs, 6 of them, sat in a horseshoe shape, facing a balcony. Glass display shelves lined the walls. Evenly spaced on the shelves were items that looked like they belonged in a museum. Geodes, antique weaponry, statues of onyx and stone. Opposite the balcony, at the back of the room, was a desk. As I got closer, I saw a large bronze compass built into its surface. I trailed my fingers over the compass. It turned, northwest, and a compartment in the desk popped open. The wing was where Tobias Hawthorne spent his last few months, I thought. Suddenly, I didn't just want to look in the open compartment. I wanted to rifle through every drawer in Tobias Hawthorne's desk. There had to be something, somewhere, that could tell me what he was thinking, why I was here, why he'd pushed his family aside for me. Had I done something to impress him? Did he see something in me? Or Mom? I got a closer look at the open compartment. Inside, there were deep grooves, carved in the shape of the letter T. I ran my fingers across the grooves. Nothing happened. I tested the rest of the drawers. Locked. Beside the desk, there were shelves filled with plaques and trophies. I walked toward them. The first plaque had the words, United States of America, engraved on a gold background. Underneath them, there was a seal. It took a little more reading of the smaller print for me to realize that it was a patent, and not one issued to Tobias Hawthorne. This patent was held by Xander. There were at least a half-dozen other patents on the wall, several world records and trophies in every shape imaginable. A bronze bull rider, a surfboard, a sword. There were medals, multiple black belts, championship cups, some of them national championships, from everything from motocross to swimming to pinball. There was a series of 4 framed comic books, superheroes I recognized, the kind they made movies about, authored by the 4 Hawthorne's grandsons. A coffee table book of photographs bore Grayson's name on the spine. This wasn't just a display, it was practically a shrine. Tobias Hawthorne's ode to his 4 extraordinary grandsons. This made no sense. It didn't make sense that any 4 people, 3 of them teenagers, could have achieved this much, and it definitely didn't make sense that the man who'd kept this display in his office had decided that none of them deserved to inherit his fortune. Even if you thought that you'd manipulated our grandfather into this, I could hear Xander saying, I guarantee that he'd be the one manipulating you. Avery? The second I heard my name, I stepped back from the trophies. Hastily, I closed the compartment I'd released on the desk. In here, I called back. Libby appeared in the doorway. This is unreal, she said. This entire place is unreal. That's one word for it. I tried to focus on the marvel that was Hawthorne House and not my sister's black eye, but I failed. If possible, the bruising looked worse now. Libby wrapped her arms around her torso. I'm fine, she said, when she noticed my stare. It doesn't even hurt that much. Please tell me you're done with him. The words escaped before I could stop them. Libby needed support right now, not judgment. But I couldn't help but think that Drake had been her ex before. I'm here, aren't I? Libby said. I chose you. I wanted her to choose herself, and I said as much. Libby let her hair fall under her face and turned toward the balcony. She was silent for a full minute before she spoke again. My mom used to hit me. Only when she was really stressed, you know. She was a single mom and things were hard. I could understand that. I tried to make everything easier. I could picture her as a kid, getting hit and trying to make it up to the person who hit her. Libby. Drake loved me, Avery. I know he did, and I tried so hard to understand. She was hugging herself harder now. The black polish on her nails looked fresh. Perfect. But you were right. My heart broke a little. I didn't want to be. Libby stood there for a few more seconds, then walked over to the balcony and tested the door. I followed, and the 2 of us stepped out into the night air. Down below, there was a swimming pool. It must have been heated because someone was swimming laps. Grayson. My body recognized him before my mind did. His arms beat against the water in a brutally efficient butterfly stroke. And his back muscles. I have to tell you something, Libby said beside me. That let me tear my eyes away from the pool. And the swimmer. About Drake? I asked. No, I heard something. Libby swallowed. When Oren introduced me to my security detail, I overheard Zara's husband talking. They're running a test, a DNA test, on you. I had no idea where Zara and her husband had gotten a sample of my DNA, but I wasn't entirely surprised. I thought it myself. The simplest explanation for including a total stranger in your will was that she wasn't a total stranger. The simplest explanation was that I was a Hawthorne. I had no business watching Grayson at all. If Tobias Hawthorne was your fault, Libby managed, then If Tobias Hawthorne was your father, Libby managed, then my dad, isn't. And if we don't share a dad, and we barely even saw each other growing up, don't you say we're not sisters, I told her. Would you still want me here? Libby asked me, her fingers rubbing at her choker. If we're not, I want you here, I promised, no matter what. Chapter 19. That night, I took the longest shower of my life. The hot water supply was endless. The glass doors in the shower held in the steam. It was like having my own personal sauna. After drying off with plush, oversized towels, I put on my ratty pajamas and flopped down on what I was pretty sure were Egyptian cotton sheets. I wasn't sure how long I'd been lying there when I heard it. A voice. Pull the candlestick. I was on my feet in an instant, whirling to put my back to the wall. On instinct, I grabbed the keys I'd left on the nightstand, in case I needed a weapon. My eyes scanned the room for the person who'd spoken and came up empty. Pull the candlestick on the fireplace, Eris, unless you want me stuck back here. Annoyance replaced my initial fight-or-flight response. I narrowed my eyes at the stone fireplace in the back of the room. Sure enough, there was a candelabra on the mantel. Pretty sure this qualifies as stalking, I told the fireplace, or, more accurately, the boy on the other side of it. Still, I couldn't not pull the candlestick. Who could resist something like that? I wrapped my hand around the base of the candelabra. I was met with resistance, and another suggestion came from behind the fireplace. Don't just pull forward, angle it down. I did as I was instructed. The candelabra rotated, and then I heard a click, and the back of the fireplace separated from its floor, just by an inch. A moment later, I saw fingertips in the gap, and I watched as the back of the fireplace was lifted up and disappeared behind a mantel. Now at the back of the fireplace there was an opening. Jameson Hawthorne stepped through. He straightened, then returned the candle to its upright position, and the entry he just used was slowly covered once more. It's a secret passage, he explained unnecessarily. The house is full of them. Am I supposed to find that comforting? I asked him, or terrifying? You tell me, mystery girl. Are you more comforted or terrified? He let me sit with that for a moment. Or is it possible that you're intrigued? The first time I met Jason Hawthorne, he was drunk. This time I didn't smell alcohol in his breath, but I wondered how much he'd slept since the reading of the will. His hair was behaving itself, but there was something wild in his glinting green eyes. You're not asking about the keys. Jameson offered me a crooked little smile. I expected you to ask about the keys. I held them up. This was your doing. Not a question, and he didn't treat it like one. It's a little bit of a family tradition. I'm not family. He tilted his head to one side. Do you believe that? I thought about Tobias Hawthorne and about the DNA test that Zara's husband was already running. I don't know. It would be a shame, Jameson commented, if we were related. He spared another smile at me, slow and sharp-edged. Don't you think? What was it with me and Hawthorne boys? Stop thinking about his smile. Stop looking at his lips. Just stop. I think that you already have met more family than you can deal with. You already have more family than you can deal with. I cross my arms. I also think you're a lot less smooth than you think you are. You want something. I'd always been good at math. I'd always been logical. He was here in my room, flirting for a reason. Everyone is going to want something from you soon, Eris, he said. The question is, how many of us want something you're willing to give? Just the sound of his voice, the way he phrased things, I could feel myself wanting to lean toward him. This was ridiculous. Stop calling me Eris, I shot back. And if you turn answering my question into some kind of riddle, I'm calling security. That's the thing, mystery girl. I don't think I'm turning anything into a riddle. I don't think I had to. You are a riddle, a puzzle, a game. My grandfather's last. He was looking at me so intently now, I didn't dare look away. Why do you think this house has so many secret passages? Why are there so many keys that don't work in any of the locks? Every desk my grandfather bought has secret compartments. There's an organ in the theater, and if you play a specific sequence of notes, it unlocks a hidden drawer. Every Saturday morning, from the time I was a kid until the night my grandfather died, he sat with my brothers and me and gave us a riddle, a puzzle, an impossible challenge, something to solve. And then he died. And then James took a step toward me. There was you. Grayson thinks you're some kind of master manipulator. My aunt is convinced that you must have Hawthorne blood. But I think you're the old man's final riddle. One last puzzle to be solved. He took another step, bringing the two of us that much closer. He chose you for a reason, Avery. You're special, and I think he wanted me, to figure out why. I'm not a puzzle. I could feel my heart beating in my neck. He was close enough now to see my pulse. Sure you are, Jameson replied. We all are. Don't tell me that some part of you hasn't been trying to figure us out. Grayson, me, maybe even Xander. Is this all a game to you? I put my hand out to stop him from advancing farther. He took one last step, forcing my palm to his chest. Everything's a game, Avery Grams. The only thing we get to decide in this life is if we play to win. He reached up to brush the hair from my face, and I jerked back. Get out, I said lowly. Use the normal door this time. My entire life, no one had touched me as gently as he had a moment before. You're angry, Jameson said. I told you. If you want something, ask. Don't come in here talking about how I'm special. Don't touch my face. You are special. Jameson kept his hands to himself, but his expression in his eyes never shifted. And what I want is to figure out why. Why you, Avery? He took a step back, giving me space. Don't tell me you don't want to know, too. I did. Of course I did. I'm going to leave this here. Jameson held up an envelope. He laid it carefully on the mantel. Read it, and then tell me this isn't a game to be won. Tell me this isn't a riddle. Jameson reached for the candelabra, and as the fireplace passage opened once more, he offered a targeted parting shot. He left you the fortune, Avery, and all he left us is you. Chapter 20. Long after Jameson had disappeared into darkness and the fireplace door had closed, I stood there staring. Was this the only secret passage into my room? In a house like this one, how could I ever really know that I was alone? Eventually, I moved to take the envelope Jameson had left on the mantel, even though everything in me rebelled against what he had said. I wasn't a puzzle. I was just a girl. I turned the envelope over and saw Jameson's name scrawled across the front. This is his letter, I realized, the one he was given at the reading of the will. I still had no idea what to make of my own letter, No idea what Tobias Hawthorne was apologizing for. Maybe Jameson's letter would clarify something. I opened it and read. The message was longer than mine, but made even less sense. Jameson, better the devil you know than the one you don't. Or is it? Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. All that glitters is not gold. Nothing is certain but death and taxes. There but for the grace of God I go. Don't judge. Tobias Tattersall Hawthorne. By the next morning I'd memorized Jameson's letter. It sounded like it was written by someone who hadn't slept in days, manic, rattling off one platitude after another. But the longer the words marinated in the back of my brain, the more I began to consider the possibility that Jameson might be right. There's something there in the letters, in Jameson's, in mine, an answer, or at least a clue. Rolling out of my massive bed, I went to unplug my phones, plural, from their chargers and discovered that my old phone had powered down. With some hefty pushes on the power button and a little bit of luck, I managed to cajole it back on. I didn't know how I could even begin to explain the past 24 hours to Max, but I needed to talk to someone. I needed a reality check. What I got was more than 100 missed calls and texts. Suddenly, the reason Elisa had given me a new phone was clear. People I hadn't spoken to in years were messaging me. People who had spent their lives ignoring me clamored for my attention. Coworkers, classmates, even teachers. I had no idea how half of them had gotten my number. I grabbed my new phone, went online, and discovered that my email and social media accounts were even worse. I had thousands of messages, most of them from strangers. To some people, you'll be Cinderella. To others, Marie Antoinette. My stomach muscles tightened. I set my phones down and stood up, my hand going over my mouth. I should have seen this coming. It shouldn't have been a shock to my system at all, but I wasn't ready. How could a person be ready for this? Avery? A voice called into my room. Female and not Libby. Alyssa? I double-checked before opening my bedroom door. You missed breakfast, came the reply. Brisk, businesslike, definitely Elisa. I opened the door. Miss Laughlin wasn't sure what you'd like, so she made a bit of everything, Elisa told me. A woman I didn't recognize, early 20s maybe, followed her into the room carrying a tray. She deposited it on my nightstand, cut a narrowed-eyed glance my way, then left without a word. I thought the staff only came in as needed, I said, turning to Elisa once the door was closed. Elisa blew out a long breath. The staff, she said, is very, very loyal and extremely concerned right now. That, Elisa nodded to the door, was one of the newer hires. She's one of Nash's. I narrowed my eyes. What do you mean she's one of Nash's? Lisa's composure never faltered. Nash is a bit of a nomad. He leaves, he wanders, he finds some hole-in-the-wall place to bartend for a while, and then, like a moth to the flame, he comes back. Usually with one or two hopeless souls in tow. As I'm sure you can imagine, there's plenty of work to be had at Hawthorne House. And Mr. Hawthorne had a habit of putting Nash's lost souls to work. And the girl who's just in here? I asked. She's been here for about a year. Elisa's tone gave nothing away. She'd die for Nash. Most of them would. Are she and Nash, I wasn't sure how to phrase this, involved? No, Elisa said sharply. She took a deep breath and continued. Nash would never let anything happen with someone he had any kind of power over. He has his flaws, a savior complex among them, but he's not like that. I couldn't take the elephant in the room any longer, so I dragged it into the light. He's your ex. Elisa's chin rose. We were engaged for a time, she allowed. We were young, there were issues, but I assure you I have no conflict of interest when it comes to your representation. Engaged? I had tried to actively keep my jaw from dropping. My lawyer planned to marry a Hawthorne, and she hadn't thought that merited a mention. If you prefer, Elisa said stiffly, I can arrange for someone else from the firm to work as your liaison. I forced myself to stop gawking at her and tried to process the situation. Elisa had been nothing but professional and seemed almost frighteningly good at her job. Plus, given the whole broken engagement thing, she had a reason not to be loyal to the Hawthorns. It's okay, I said. I don't need a new one. That got a small smile out of her. I've taken the liberty of enrolling you at Heights Country Day. Elisa moved to the next item on her to-do list with merciless efficiency. It's a school that Xander and Jameson attend. Grayson graduated last year. I'd hoped to have you enrolled and at least partially acclimated before the news of your inheritance broke in the press, but we'll deal with the hand we've been dealt. She gave me a look. You're the Hawthorne's heiress, and you're not a Hawthorne. That's going to draw attention even at a place like Country Day, where you'll be far from the only one with means. Means, I thought. How many ways do rich people have of not saying the word rich? I'm pretty sure I can handle a bunch of prep school kids, I said, even though I wasn't sure of that. At all. Elisa caught sight of my phones. She squatted down and plucked my old phone from the ground. I'll dispose of this for you. She didn't even have to look at the screen to realize what had happened. What was still happening, if the constant muted buzzing of the phone is any indication. Wait, I told her. I grabbed the phone, ignored the messages, and went for Max's number. I transferred it to my new phone. I suggest you strictly regulate who has access to your new number, Elisa told me. This isn't going to die down anytime soon. This, I repeated. The media attention, strangers sending me messages, people who never cared about me deciding that we were best friends. The students at Country Day will have a bit more discretion, Elisa told me. Discretion, Elisa told me. But you need to be prepared. As awful as it sounds, money is power, and power is magnetic. You're not the person you were 2 days ago. I wanted to argue that point, but instead my mind cycled back to Tobias Hawthorne's letters to Jameson, his words echoing in my mind. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Chapter 21. You read my letter. Jameson Hawthorne slid into the back seat of the SUV beside me. Orrin had already given me the rundown on the security features of the car. The windows were bulletproof and heavily tinted, and Tobias Hawthorne had owned multiple identical SUVs for times when decoys were needed. Going to Heights Country Day School apparently wasn't one of them. Xander need a ride? Orrin asked me from the driver's seat, catching Jameson's eye in the mirror. Xander goes to school early on Fridays, Jameson said. Extracurricular activity. In the mirror, Orrin's gaze shifted to me. You okay having company? Was I okay in close quarters with Jameson Hawthorne, who'd stepped out of a fireplace and into my bedroom the night before? He touched my face. It's fine, I told Orrin, squelching the memory. Orrin turned the key in the ignition and then cast a glance back over his shoulder. She's the package, he told Jameson. If there's an incident, you save her first, Jameson finished. He kicked a foot up on the center console and reclined against the door. Grandfather always said Hawthorne males have 9 lives. I can't possibly have burned through more than 5 of them. Orrin turned back to the front and put the car in drive, and then we were off. Even through the bulletproof windows, I could hear the minor roar that went up when we passed outside the gates. Paparazzi. There'd been at least a dozen before. Now there were twice that number, maybe more. I didn't let myself dwell on that for long. I looked away from the reporters and toward Jameson. Here, I reached into my bag and handed him my letter. I showed you mine, Jameson said, playing the double entendre for all it was worth. You show me yours. Shut up and read. He did. That's it? He asked when he was done. I nodded. Any idea what he's apologizing for? Jameson asked. Any great and anonymous wrongs in your past? One, I swallowed and broke eye contact. But unless you think your grandfather is responsible for my mom having an extremely rare blood type and ending up way too low on the transplant list, he's probably in the clear. I meant that to sound sarcastic, not raw. We'll come back to your letter. Jameson did me the courtesy of ignoring every hint of emotion in my tone, and turned our attention to mine. I'm curious, mystery girl. What do you make of it? I got the feeling this was another test, a chance to show my worth. Challenge accepted. Your letter is written in proverbs, I said, starting with the obvious. All that glitters is not gold. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. He's saying that money and power are dangerous, and the first line, better the devil you know than the one you don't. Or is it? That's obvious, right? His family was the devil that Tobias Hawthorne had known, and I was the devil he hadn't. But if that's true, why me? If I was a stranger, how had he chosen me? A dart on a map? Max's imaginary computer algorithm? And if I was a stranger, why was he sorry? Keep going, Jameson prompted. I focused. Nothing is certain but death and taxes. Sounds to me like he knew he was going to die. We didn't even know he was sick, Jameson murmured. That hit close to home. Tobias Hawthorne had apparently been a champion at keeping secrets, like my mother. I could be the devil he doesn't know, even if he knew her. I could still be a stranger, even if she wasn't. I could feel Jameson beside me, watching me in a way that made me wonder if he could see straight inside my head. There but for the grace of God go I said, returning to the letter's contents, intent on following this to the end. With different circumstances, any of us could have ended up in anyone else's position. I translated. The rich boy can become a pauper. Jameson took his feet down from the center console and turned his head wholly toward me, his green eyes catching mine in a way that made my entire body go to high alert. And the girl from the wrong side of the tracks can become a princess, a riddle, an heiress, a game. Jameson smiled. If this was a test, I'd passed. On the surface, he told me, it appears that the letter outlines what we already know. My grandfather died and left everything to the devil he didn't know, thereby reversing the fortune of many. Why? Because power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. I couldn't have looked away from him if I'd tried. And what about you, heiress? Jameson continued. Are you incorruptible? Is that why he left the fortune in your hands? The expression playing at the corners of his lips wasn't a smile. I wasn't sure exactly what it was, other than magnetic. I know my grandfather. Jameson stared at me intently. There's more here. A play on words, a code, a hidden message. Something. He handed my letter back. I took it and looked down. Your grandfather signed my letter with initials. I offered up one last observation. And yours with his full name. And what, Jameson said lightly, do we make of that? We. How did Hawthorne and I become a we? I should have been weary. Even with Orrin's assurances, and Elisa's, I should have been keeping my distance. But there was something about this family. Something about these boys. Almost there. Orrin spoke from the front seat. If I'd been following our conversation, he gave no sign of it. The Country Day administration has been briefed on the situation. I signed off on your school's security years ago, when the boys enrolled. You should be fine here, Avery, but do not, under any circumstances, leave the campus. Our car pulled past a guarded gate. I won't be far. I turned my mind from the letters, Jameson's and mine, to what awaited me outside the car. This is a high school, I thought, taking in the sight outside my window. It looked more like a college or a museum, like something out of a catalog where all the students were beautiful and smiling. Suddenly, the uniform I'd been given felt like it didn't belong on my body. I was a kid playing dress-up, pretending that wearing a kitchen pot on her head could turn her into an astronaut, that smudging lipstick all over her face made her a star. To the rest of the world, I was a sudden celebrity. I was a fascination, and a target. But here? How could people who'd grown up with this kind of money see a girl like me as anything but a fraud? I hate to puzzle and run, mystery girl. Jameson's hand was already on the door handle as the SUV pulled to a stop. But the last thing you need on your first day at the school is for anyone to see you getting cozy with me. Chapter 22. Jameson was gone in a blink. He disappeared into a crowd of burgundy blazers and shiny hair, and I was left still buckled into my seat, unable to move. It's just a school, Orrin told me. They're just kids. Rich kids. Kids whose baseline for normal was probably just being the child of a brain surgeon or hotshot lawyer. When they thought college, they were probably talking about Harvard or Yale. And here I was, wearing a pleated plaid skirt and a burgundy blazer, completed with a navy crest embossed with Latin words I didn't know how to read. I grabbed my new phone and sent a message to Max. This is Avery. New number. Call me. Glancing at the front seat again, I forced my hand to the door. It wasn't Orrin's job to coddle me. It was his job to protect me, and not from the stares I fully expected the moment I stepped out of the car. Do I meet you back here at the end of the day? I asked. I'll be here. I waited a beat, in case Orrin had any other instructions, and then opened the door. Thanks for the ride. Nobody was staring at me. Nobody was whispering. In fact, as I walked toward the twin archways marking the entrance to the main building, I got the distinct feeling that the lack of response was deliberate. Not staring, not talking, just the lightest of glances every few steps. Whenever I looked at anyone, they looked away. I told myself they were probably trying not to make a big deal of my arrival, that this was what discretion looked like, but it still felt like I'd wandered into a ballroom where everyone else was dancing a complicated waltz, twisting, spinning around me like I wasn't even there. As I closed the distance to the archways, a girl with long black hair bucked the trend of ignoring me like a thoroughbred shaking off an inferior rider. She watched me intently, and one by one, the girls around her did the same. When I reached them, the black-haired girl stepped away from the group, toward me. I'm Thea, she said, smiling. You must be Avery. Her voice was perfectly pleasant, borderline musical, like a siren who knew with the least bit of effort she could sing sailors into the sea. Why don't I show you to the office? The headmaster is Mr. McGowan. She's got a PhD from Princeton. She'll keep you in her office for at least half an hour, talking about opportunities and traditions. If she offers you coffee, take it. Her own personal roast, to die for. Thea seemed well aware of the fact that they were both getting plenty of stares now. She also seemed to be enjoying it. When Dr. Matt gives you your schedule, make sure you have time for lunch every day. Country Day uses what they call modular scheduling, which means we operate on a 6-day cycle, even though we only have school 5 days a week. Classes meet anywhere from 3 to 5 times a cycle, so if you're not careful, you can end up in class straight through lunch on A day, and B day can have practically no classes. And straight through lunch on A day and B day, but have no classes on C or F. Okay, my head was spinning, but I forced out one more word. Thanks. People at the school are like fairies in Celtic mythology, Thea said lightly. You shouldn't thank us unless you want to owe us a boon. I wasn't sure how to reply to that, so I said nothing. Thea didn't seem to take offense. As she led me down a long hallway with old class portraits lining the halls, she filled the silence. We're not so bad, really. Most of us, anyway. As long as you're with me, you'll be fine. That rankled. I'll be fine regardless, I told her. Clearly, Thea said empathetically. That was a reference to the money. It had to be, didn't it? Thea's dark eyes rolled over mine. It must be hard, she said, studying my response with an intensity that her smile did absolutely nothing to hide. Living in that house with those boys. It's fine, I said. Oh, honey, Thea shook her head. If there's one thing the Hawthorne family isn't, it's fine. They were a twisted, broken mess before you got here, and they'll be a twisted, broken mess once you're gone. Gone? Where exactly did Thea think I was going? We'd reached the end of the hallway now, and the door to the headmaster's office. It opened, and 4 boys peered out in single file. All 4 of them were bleeding. All 4 were smiling. Xander was the 4th. He saw me, and then he saw who I was with. Thea, he said. She gave him a too sweet smile, then lifted a hand to his face, or more specifically to his bloody lip. Xander, looks like you lost. There are no losers in Robot Battle Death Match Fight Club, Xander said stoically. There are only winners and people whose robots sort of explode. I thought about Tobias Hawthorne's office, about the patents I'd seen on the walls. What kind of genius was Xander Hawthorne? And was he missing an eyebrow? Thea proceeded as if that was exactly nothing to remark on. I was just showing Avery to the office and giving her some insider tips on surviving Country Day. Charming, Xander declared. Avery, did the ever-delightful Thea Caligaris happen to mention that her uncle is married to my aunt? Zara's last name was Hawthorne Caligaris. I heard Zara and your uncle are looking for ways to challenge the will. Xander gave every appearance of talking to Thea, but I got the distinct feeling that he was really issuing a warning to me. Don't trust Thea. Thea gave an elegant little shrug, undaunted. I wouldn't know.